Tonight, the campaigning, the debating.
Are we really going to debate about a fan?
Peculiar situation.
And the waiting are over. Now, your vote is your decision.
They've both been governor who have dramatic different visions. All Charlie Crist wants is another title. Let's give him a title. Loser on November 4th.
Live from the News Center, it's Your Vote, Battleground, Florida.
Good evening, I'm Cate, and welcome to this special one-hour edition of Your Vote Battleground, Florida. We have a terrific lineup of guests in studio tonight, including some familiar faces who've been involved in some heated political battles of their own in past years. Of course, the focus of this midterm election in Florida is on the fight for governor. And when you look at the polls, it couldn't be much closer. And that's a big reason why Governor Rick Scott and former governor, now Democrat Charlie Crist, are on the campaign trail almost nonstop right now. They're both working to influence those undecided voters and tip the scale in their direction. Yet the needle has hardly moved toward either candidate for weeks. And Libertarian candidate Adrian Wiley, left out in the cold in 3 major gubernatorial debates, may still have an impact on this race. We shall see. Now let's look at the latest and the final Quinnipiac University poll that was released today for the Florida governor's race. It shows 42% of likely voters favor Charlie Crist. 41% say they are supporting Rick Scott. 7% are standing with Adrian Wiley. Last Thursday's Quinnipiac poll showed Charlie Crist up by 3 with 43% of the vote to Rick Scott's 40%, and Wiley had 8%. Now, we have a lot of ground to cover tonight, and we're going to kick it off with our political reporter, Lauren Mayk, who's been on the campaign trail. You were out there again today. These candidates have been going nonstop, and you have seen a lot over the past several months.
Yeah, Keith, this race has been expensive. It has, at times, been a bit nasty. And, you know, it is also a bit unusual. We've got governor versus former governor. So it is a pretty interesting one, and we have compiled a look at just what has made this race so compelling.
I announced that I am running for governor of Florida.
It was a year ago when Charlie Crist announced he wanted his old job back. But this campaign would be different.
Yeah, I'm running as a Democrat.
The man who had governed as a Republican was now running as a Democrat. But incumbent Governor Rick Scott was ready for a fight, armed with stats on an improving economy and blame pointing in one direction: Charlie Crist.
We shouldn't have had the downturn. We shouldn't have lost those 832,000 jobs before I became governor.
Perhaps this moment told us all we needed to know about what this campaign would be like. A so-called presser bomb, as Crist strolls up to Scott's lieutenant governor in the middle of some trash talk. There was plenty of name-calling.
But Charlie's the zero-wage governor.
The guy will say anything and do anything to win. He's bad.
Crist took aim at Scott, largely ignoring primary opponent Nan Rich.
I am a lifelong Democrat.
And refusing to debate her.
Are you concerned about what that says to Democrats?
No, I'm not.
Controversy on the campaign trail erupted over uniformed law enforcement at campaign events.
Did you really think that all of those deputies were off duty?
Gosh, I'm very proud that last week the police chiefs endorsed me.
And for Crist, use of a public high school in an ad.
But Rick Scott's education cuts are...
Did you really not think that that might cause some issues?
And a yellow school bus stalled by a fender bender.
We hadn't even left Orlando yet when all of a sudden everybody on this bus felt something.
The ad war was nonstop. Crist was hammered on his party and position changes, Scott on his business history. But in a statewide televised debate, it was a fan that stole the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have an extremely peculiar situation right now.
The plug-in fan that Crist had under his podium actually stopped the show.
We have been told that Governor Scott will not be participating in this debate.
7 minutes later, the governor arrived on stage, with his campaign arguing he didn't know Crist was out there.
Charlie was throwing a fit, saying he wasn't going to go on stage, so we waited to see if he was even going to show up.
Well, I think it's much ado about nothing.
Fangate behind them, the final push involves high-profile surrogates and pleas to get your neighbors, get your friends to the polls, because this one could be close.
I'm happy to.
After all of these months and the millions and millions spent, and to still have this race be a toss-up, it is pretty amazing, and it makes tomorrow all the more important. Keith?
Come down to Election Day. Thank you, Laura. Joining us on set tonight to offer their perspective on this governor's race, former chief financial officer for the great state of Florida and the 2010 Democratic gubernatorial nominee, Alex Sink, as well as Republican representative from the 38th District, Will Weatherford, who also serves as Speaker of the Florida House. Thank you both so much for joining us here tonight. It is interesting. Everybody's saying it, and it seems like it's going to come down to this final day. Can you imagine a race being this close?
Of course I can.
I guess you could.
Less than 1% 4 years ago, so here we go again. And I would almost say at the end of the day, tomorrow we'll know, but we probably won't. Like 4 years ago, it was 3 o'clock in the morning before we knew for sure.
So do you think that it'll actually come down to one of these races where we won't have an answer, Will, until tomorrow or late in the evening?
I think it's very possible. I mean, all the polls suggest this is going to be an extremely tight race. It was 4 years ago with Mrs. Sink when she was running, but, you know, it's a very interesting race. You have a former governor against a current governor, a lot at stake for the state of Florida and the political infrastructure in Florida. I'll be watching very closely, just like everyone else.
And the amount of money that's been spent on this campaign, and I think a lot of voters out there saying, I'm over it, I've seen enough, and in fact, I may be confused about what I'm seeing anymore because it's been so contentious, you don't even know who to believe anymore.
Right.
What do you think? Do you think Charlie Crist has run a good campaign, and what are the strengths of this campaign so far?
Well, the strength of his campaign is that he is a former governor. He understands the job. He was well known going into the race, so he didn't have to spend a lot of money building up name recognition. And I think that it's all about get out the vote. And whether or not his field team, and I understand he has over 100 field people, particularly in South Florida, whether he's able to increase the Democratic turnout in those voter-rich South Florida counties. And so far, so good. The numbers look very, very good for the Democrats compared to where we were 4 years ago.
In the early voting.
In the early voting
and
the absentee ballots. I think it's projected that this is the first time in the Florida election that more people will have voted actually before Election Day than on Election Day.
And what's interesting is both sides, and Rick Scott's camp saying the same thing, we feel good about early voting, and we think we've run a really good campaign, and yet you're still neck and neck. What do you think about the way this campaign's played out from the Rick Scott camp?
Well, we're going to go in with a lead. So we'll go into Election Day with a lead somewhere between 80 and 100,000 votes, but it's all going to come down to Election Day for sure. To me, it's a very easy decision, though. We have a gentleman who was a former governor, Charlie Crist. He's a really nice guy. He's a very smooth politician. He was a terrible governor. And to me, I believe Rick Scott can run on a platform that shows the success, the 800 and some thousand jobs that have been created, the budget surpluses that we've seen, the leadership that he's shown. I served with Charlie Crist during my first 4 years. He's a really nice person. He was not a very good governor.
You raised your eyebrow when he said that.
Oh, of course, because I think Rick Scott has been a terrible governor. He does not represent the values of Floridians. He's gutted environmental policy. He has flaunted the sunshine laws. He's had terrible problems with his staff. In his departments, in the Department of Prisons, the Department of Children and Families. We could go on and on and on. He went into the job not knowing anything about how to govern, and he just has not represented the values of the people of Florida, and it shows up. His unfavorable numbers started out high, and they've remained very, very high for a sitting governor who has as much power as he did.
But in all fairness, Charlie Crist's negative numbers are also very high, and I'm sure you would argue the same point that she's making against your candidate.
I would also just argue, you know, he ran on a platform that he was going to create jobs and economic opportunity.
He being the former governor.
Governor Scott.
Oh, Governor
that was
Scott.
his platform. When he ran 4 years ago, he said, I'm going to create jobs for citizens in Florida who are looking for jobs. And he's done that. And so all the benchmarks he said he would set forth, I believe he's achieved. I'm not saying that he's done everything right. No governor has. It's a very tough job. But if you look at the record of Charlie Crist's 4 years as governor, and then you just juxtapose those to the 4 years with Governor Scott, it's just not even close.
Well, I would disagree. Governor Scott did run on the platform, as I well know, that he's going to add 700,000 more jobs than the economists said would naturally come to Florida, which was 1 million jobs. So he promised 1.7 million jobs, and he hasn't come anywhere close to achieving that. So let's not rewrite history here.
Well, we're going to take a break right here. We're not going to rewrite anything. There's a lot more to come here on this special edition of Your Vote Battleground Florida. Great guests with us tonight. A lot of information to come. Stay with us. And welcome back. I'm Keith. Cate, you're watching our live News Channel 8 special, Your Vote Battleground, Florida. You know, sometimes it's helpful to take a look back at history. And the last time we had a governor's race back in 2010, the polls were very close right before election today. We can show you these numbers. The Quinnipiac poll taken between October 25th and October 31st, 2010 actually showed Alex Sink with a 1 percentage point advantage over Rick Scott. We also had a Mason-Dixon poll from that same time period, and it showed Alex Sink ahead of Rick Scott 46% to 43%. And it all ended with one of the narrowest margins of victory in a gubernatorial race, with Rick Scott winning by just a squishy point over 1%. And it was so frustrating. And it was late in the evening, but you had the advantage. And take us back to 2010, if you could, not to relive history, but it's interesting to note the polls showed you with the advantage. What happened?
Well, a couple of things. One was the Tea Party surge. Every other Democrat in the country was losing by double digits. I mean, sitting Democratic governors went down. So there was this overwhelming anti-Washington, very strong Tea Party element, which doesn't seem to exist so much today. And the second piece of it was because, let's remember, we had a three-way Senate race going. And so many people, many of those South Florida people, the heavy Democratic voting population down there, where my margin of victory was fine, 60-40, 70-30, even in a couple of counties. But the turnout was very suppressed. Only 41% of Democrats turned out in Palm Beach and Broward County. And so the strategy now, 4 years later, is that became a roadmap for the Charlie Crist campaign. They know that they've got to drive out a higher percentage turnout in Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. If they can get to 45% turnout, Charlie Crist is going to win this race.
Well, let's look at that in graphic detail, because Lauren Mayk, our political reporter, is standing over by the board right now. Lauren, you can take us back to 2010 and show us what was going on in these counties that Alex Sink did win.
Yeah, Keith, take a look at this. Just looking at the map, this is a sea of red here. Red is Rick Scott's color here. Alex Sink is in blue for the Democrats. So take a look at this. A lot of red on here. We've got blue in some of the major cities in Florida. Miami down here. You've got Orlando, and you've got Tampa over there. Now, for Rick Scott, important areas, you know, you've got down here the Lee and Collier counties. You've got up here in the Panhandle, important ones. But let's take a look at what happened with the Tampa Bay area in particular. Take a look at this. This is Hillsborough County right here. Alex Sink 50% to 47% for Rick Scott. So the Democrats won here in Hillsborough County, and also in Pinellas County. Take a look at this, a larger margin here, 51% for Alex Sink, 45% for Rick Scott. But let's stay in the Bay Area and take a look at Pasco County. You know, this is an area, we even heard folks talking this week that this could be sort of considered a bellwether for the state. Take a look at Pasco County. Rick Scott wins Pasco County 52% to 43%, so a larger margin there. But as you were just talking to Alex Sink down there, of course, we've got the South Florida area that she was talking about, that the margins were good, but the turnout wasn't. So we'll have to see where things go. But just looking at this 2010 map is really interesting, and sort of takes you back to what went right for the Republicans and what went wrong for the Democrats. Keith.
All right, thank you for that, Lauren. It does kind of put it in perspective, but there's no secret, Will, that the South Florida area is a bellwether area for Charlie Crist. What does Rick Scott do to combat that, to kind of make his troops show up in those areas, or maybe overcompensate in the Pascos and the Panhandle?
Well, yeah, I think Charlie has helped us out a lot on that front. I mean, Charlie Crist was a person who was a Republican. A lot of us knew him very well. He decided that he couldn't win Republican primaries anymore, so he went independent. Now he's a Democrat, and so he kind of energizes the Republican base on his own. To give my friend Alex Sink a little bit of credit here, she was running into a serious headwind in 2010. Tremendous turnout on the Republican side, and it almost didn't matter if she was winning by big numbers in South Florida. The turnout statewide was overwhelming for Republicans. Rick Scott's not going to have that in 2014 and tomorrow. But what we do have, I believe, is that I think he's holding more of the Republican base. When Alex Sink ran 4 years ago, she actually got a big chunk of the Republicans to vote for her. Charlie Crist isn't seeing that. And so when you look at the polls and you look at the turnout numbers, maybe we're not turning out as many people, but you're not seeing Republicans vote for Charlie Crist in the numbers that you saw them vote for Alex Sink. And that is a big differentiator.
And this is a midterm election when normally you wouldn't have as many folks turning out as compared to a presidential election. But what does it have to be for a Charlie Crist to pull out victory here? How many people have to show up? Is it 6 million plus, you know, so many more? How many?
Oh, he just needs one more vote than Rick Scott. I believe in the last race there were 5 million voters, and they're projecting as many. I've heard 5.5 million. Have you heard a number, Will?
They say 5.5 to 6.
Well, you've got early voting's already at 3, so I mean,
right. It's the voting turnout is already much higher than it was before. So
yeah.
who's favored in that?
It's hard to say. And then we've got the impact of the Libertarian that you mentioned.
Adrian Wiley.
It's 7%. That's pretty high, and I happen to believe that there are people out there who tell me they can't vote for either candidate, and therefore they're voting for the Libertarian as a protest vote. Because
now would that traditionally go towards a Charlie Crist? Well, what do you think? I mean, Libertarians seem to side themselves with a conservative.
I think it splits 50-50. I really do. I'm not sure it's going to impact any one of them more than the other. Something to look for, though, is turnout is exceptionally high in early voting. We don't know if that's going to transcend through Election Day. And so we don't know if these people who are voting are people who are going to vote on Election Day and just decided to do it earlier, or if they're new voters. There's a lot of people speculating as to whether or not these are existing voters who are coming anyway, or they brought new people to the polls. We won't know till tomorrow is over, so it's possible that only 5 million people show up again.
It's a $64 question,
and
really.
that is really going to be a huge deal. Is the turnout going to continue on the incline, or is it going to die off at the end?
All right, we want to take a break right here, come back with more analysis. Great perspective from these two political heavyweights here in town. Stay with us. You're watching Your Vote Battleground Florida. Back after this. And welcome back to Your Vote Battleground Florida. I'm Keith Cate. Now, this is one of those what-if scenarios I'm going to play here. There's been some talk about how a Democrat, Charlie Crist, would go about doing his job if he wins this race, considering that there might be some hard feelings along the way. Would he be able to work with a Republican-led legislature, which will have the power to override a veto? Well, here's how Charlie Crist answered that question.
I'll deal with Republicans in Tallahassee the same way that I'm dealing with my Republican friend here in Pasco County. Just look them in the eye and say, you know, the election's over now, assuming it's after the election, of course. And, you know, let's go to work for the people and do what's right for them. They're counting on us.
Do you expect you'll have to do a lot of things without them?
I don't think so. I really don't. I don't want to get the cart before the horse. I want to make sure we go to these doors here first and make sure everybody gets out and votes. But, you know, Floridians have a good way of working together when it's really important, and I believe we will.
And Charlie Crist standing with Mike Fasano there. What about this, Will? I mean, here's if it happens, we're playing again the what-ifs here. Charlie Crist is re-elected, former Republican turned Democrat. What do you think?
Well, first of all, it's news to me. I didn't know Mike Fasano was still a Republican, so I'm happy to see that. But I would say that, you know, if Charlie Crist does win the election, and I think that's a big if, I still think that Governor Scott's going to win tomorrow night, it certainly sets up for a very interesting dilemma for him. You've got a very strong majority, probably a supermajority, veto-proof in the House. You're going to have a very strong majority in the Senate. While I do believe they will be forced to work together, it could get a little bit ugly and a little bit tense, and he will not be able to get anything done without working with Republicans. And so I know he's saying all the right things right now, but I think that that walk and that dance he's going to have to make is going to be a very tough one.
What do you think?
I know he can do it, because I as the sole Democrat in Tallahassee for 4 years, worked with the Republican governor, Charlie Crist, and we didn't always agree on everything, but he was quite cooperative and willing to listen, and I think Charlie, that's what's so likable about Charlie Crist, and what I like about the idea of him being the governor for the next 4 years is that he'll reach out, he'll forge friendships, and he does understand the job. He's been in the job, he understands the nuances of the job, He'll work with the Republican legislature because
sure.
it won't be in the interest of the Republicans, Will, to stand in his way and to say no and to act like those people in Congress in Washington are acting like now. And we have a lot of issues to address in our state, and we need to get about the business of solving.
But what does that say about the platform? We touched on the negatives. Whether it's Charlie Crist that gets elected or whether it's Rick Scott getting a second term here, you have a situation where the voters have seen all of this behavior in the campaign, maybe $150 million, the most expensive election in the country, and you turn on a commercial. You don't see commercials about the issues. You don't see commercials really about anything except that guy's a rat, no, that guy's a bigger rat. So you end up with a situation where whomever is elected, they have to go there. Where's the mandate?
It's a really disappointing place in American politics today. The new way people run races are not to convince people your ideas are right or that you have an agenda to take your state or your country forward. It's how bad can I tear the other person down? Right. It is very destructive. Politics have always been a contact sport, but I think we've gotten to a level.
But how do you govern after that, Will?
It's hard. It's hard. I mean, there's no question that, I think it'll be easier for Governor Scott because he's been governing and he's going to be working with a Republican-led legislature. But I do agree that on both fronts, the campaign has been extremely negative. Everyone wants a more positive campaign. But unfortunately, we live in a world where the electorate seems to be moved by the negative things they hear about someone as opposed to the positive things that someone is projecting. And so that's a bigger problem in the macro politics of America, but it's a real problem.
I do. I agree with Will. We were talking earlier about the fact that it used to be if you were running for an office, particularly for governor, you had a platform book put together. What am I going to do in transportation? What are we going to do for the economy and the environment? And we haven't had the benefit of
and
hearing
they've tried.
Any
they
of that.
Have these. We just don't hear much about it.
Well, it's because you're
control.
spending. If your opponent starts playing negative ads on you, you have to spend your money defending your record. So that's the way we got into this whole game here of you can't afford to let your opponent say something negative about you without responding. Yeah. And therefore you run out of money or time to talk about what your positive agenda is for the future.
Well, I don't want to run out of time because I want to get your takes on some of the amendments out there, some other races that you find important, worth watching. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this. And welcome back to Your Vote, Battleground, Florida. I'm Keith Cate here along with Alex Sink and Will Weatherford. And we have enough time to kind of go over what you two think are the issues or the races to watch. What's most important, do you think, right now?
Most important to me personally,
outside of the governor's race,
is that Amendment 1 passes. That's the Florida Land and Water Legacy Amendment, and that's the amendment that sets aside a certain amount of money for the specific protection of water and land resources. I think it's very important. It's very important for the future of our state, particularly the water issues, Keith. And so far, there has been no organized opposition, but the good news is it does not raise any new taxes. So it's for me, it's a feel-good, and I think for most Floridians, we usually support environmental amendments.
So you would think it would be a no-brainer, but what say you, Mr.
Well, I think that the verbiage of the amendment is basically exactly what Alex said, to invest in our natural resources, to provide more dollars for land acquisition, to protect Florida. The problem I have with it, and the reason why I voted no, and I believe that people should vote no, is because you're legislating something into the Constitution. And this is what California does. Every time they have an idea that's a good one, they decide to put it in their Constitution. And then they wake up one day 20 years later and they've committed all these dollars and they can't control their own budget. I think if people really believe that the state needs to put more money into the natural resources in Florida and water issues, which I do believe and agree with Alex are critical, they need to pressure their legislature to step up and do more, as opposed to putting it on the Constitution. The idea is good. I think the function of how they're doing it is wrong.
Vote yes, vote no. Amendment 2, what do you think?
Well, I'm also down on
legalizing marijuana.
Yeah, I'm also down on Amendment 2, and I think it's going to go down. I think it's going to surprise a lot of people with the vote that takes place tomorrow. And the reason why is, had they tailored it to people who were truly sick, most people would have voted for that. I would have voted for that, for someone who is seriously ill that needs pain relief. But the way they tailored it and the way they wrote it was so that if anybody has any illness and they go to the doctor and claim that they have something wrong with them, like tennis elbow, their doctor can write a prescription for medical marijuana. It's very similar to what they did in California. It is de facto legalization.
So you were voting no. You're pushing no on Amendment 2. What about you?
Well, I debated a long time about it. I ended up voting yes, but I agree with Will. I don't believe it's going to pass, and maybe this is an opportunity to go back and rethink maybe even the legislature will address the issue and decide to do something about this, because I don't want to be the one who gets sick and can use medical marijuana to help myself, like my friend who had ALS and did not have legal access to it.
Agreed. And we started that this year. We passed a Charlotte's Web bill that takes the oil, extracts it from the marijuana, and utilizes it for epileptic children primarily, who are the ones who are suffering. And so I think people are changing their tune with regard to real medical marijuana. I just don't think that's what this amendment does.
Okay, one final question, because we're going to run short on time, but I want any other race you're looking at that I need to keep an eyeball on?
Yes, I'm watching the Gwen Graham congressional race. Gwen Graham is the daughter of Bob Graham. She's running for Congress, a Democrat, against the Republican incumbent. It would be a huge, in this environment where the whole country thinks that the Republicans are going to have lots of wins. If Gwen Graham wins in that district around Tallahassee, that's big news.
That's a statement, all right.
For Democrats.
Will, you?
I actually agree. I think aside from the governor's race, the cabinet races are, I believe we're going to win by double digits in most of them. The legislature picks up supermajority in the House, but I think that congressional seat is something to look at, and the impact it could potentially have on the governor's race. You've got two heavyweights in the Panhandle, a legacy family in the Graham family, and a very strong candidate in Steve Sutherland. It could help dictate not just what happens in Congress, but also it could dictate what happens in Florida.
Florida House Speaker Will Weatherford, former CFO, and of course the Democratic gubernatorial nominee for 2010, Alex Sink. Thank you so much for being here. Very interesting to listen to both of you. We're going to take a break, come back with more of this special after this.
Tonight, the campaigning, the debating.
Are we really going to debate about a fan?
Peculiar situation.
And the waiting are over. Now, your vote is your decision.
Both been governor who have dramatic different visions. All Charlie Crist wants is another title. Let's give him a title. Loser on November 4th.
Live from the News Center, it's your vote, Battleground, Florida.
And right now, we want to give you a live look inside the Memory Mall at the University of Central Florida. That is where President Bill Clinton will be headlining a rally for Charlie Crist tonight. There you see Bill Nelson standing there, giving some comments, encouraging people to get out and vote. You have one more day to make your vote count. Again, this is in Orlando. We'll keep checking in to see what's happening there as the evening goes on. All right. And the last day before the election, the candidates made a final push for votes. Governor Rick Scott and Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal made a stop at a restaurant in Clearwater, only to meet up with some protesters there. And then Charlie Crist, meantime, in South Florida, also over in Orlando, both important places for him to get out the vote. And joining us now on set to kind of talk a little bit more about this gubernatorial race, our News Channel 8 political analyst, Dr. Susan MacManus from the University of South Florida, the Tampa Tribune's William March, who I'm often referring to as Wendy. When you hear me say it, just know I'm talking about William March over here from the Tampa Tribune. And, of course, our political reporter, Lauren Mayk, joins us once again. We just heard from Alex Sink and Will Weatherford kind of size up the way the campaigns have gone for the respective candidates. What are you thinking in these final hours leading up to Election Day?
Well, the biggest question mark for me is the young vote, because the young vote was critical to Obama's victory in 2012, and much has been put on the fact that with the Amendment 2 on the ballot that there would be this huge turnout of younger voters. So I'm watching that. We haven't heard a lot about that in the early discussions of absentee and early voting. I'm also watching the Hispanic vote, which we also haven't heard much about that. But those two are the biggest unknowns to me.
What do you think, William?
Well, with polls tied as they are in this race, I would normally expect a Democrat to lose, because Democrats in Florida traditionally underperform the polls in off-year elections, in midterms, when there's no president on the ballot. But Susan and I were talking before the show, this election year is very different from anything either of us has ever seen, and we're not sure our experience applies anymore.
And Lauren, when you've been out on the campaign trail, I mean, do you feel the momentum when you're with each campaign? If you're with Charlie Crist, do you feel like, oh, they might have it? And when you get with Rick Scott, do you feel the same thing?
You know, I was with Rick Scott over the weekend, and I did notice that they were all in a very good mood. It was very upbeat. Not that a campaign stop is ever going to be downbeat, but everybody was in a very good mood. They were kind of joking. And then Charlie Crist wasn't here today, but I saw some video of him, and he was, you know, kind of joking around in a good mood. So you know, nobody looks particularly stressed out, but, you know, behind the scenes, they may be very stressed out.
It puts a smile on your face, Dr. MacManus.
Guaranteed they're both stressed. Guaranteed.
Yeah,
Good front.
Is it too late to even talk about issues? I mean, we touched on that in the earlier segment. Is it just too late? Is it just down to gut reaction?
You know, Keith, I got to mention, I actually was sort of surprised. I was at an event today with Governor Rick Scott, and I heard him laying out things for his second term. I was sort of surprised to hear that, because you might wonder whether it's too late for that. But he, you know, he said, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to be the #1 job creator, take that title from Texas. So
it's the stump speech. He's still working the stump speech, but you have to be there near the stump to hear the speech. What about the folks at home who are watching on television?
Well, these ads, they're pretty clever. The ones at the end are actually some of the better ones so far. And what you're hoping with these ads is that somebody will see something in the ad that triggers something that will actually make them go vote. And people who tend to watch these ads at the end, the late deciders, are typically women voters and also younger voters. And so you see a lot of women in these late ads, as well as a few younger people. But you just need that one thing to trigger somebody, because this is a nail-biter race. And, you know, a few people here or there can make the difference in winning or losing.
All right, we're going to take a break and come back with more right after this. Also coming up, we're going to check in with NPR's Eric Deggans, joining us live in studio. Stay with us. And welcome back to Your Vote, Battleground, Florida. I'm Keith Cate. I want to touch on something real quick. We mentioned it in the first segment, and I don't know if I just let it go by, but you wrote the article, and that's where I pulled the number. $150 million you think will be spent on this gubernatorial race when it's all done?
That's a conservative estimate.
Conservative estimate.
It's probably really closer to about 175. And of course, that makes it the most expensive governor's race in the nation and the most expensive political campaign of any kind in Florida's history.
And your numbers show that most of that money, almost 2 to 1, is going to Rick Scott.
It's roughly a 2 to 1 spending advantage. The Florida elections campaign finance laws are so ridden with loopholes that no one will ever know exactly how much, but we were able to do an analysis of what published figures are available. Plus, we had some hard numbers on total TV spending. Putting that all together, it looks like about $100 million spending by Scott on his side and by his allies, and on Chris' side about $50 million. As I said, those are conservative estimates. You can probably add about $10 million to each side.
And you can, and I want to go over to Lauren Mayk here, because you're standing by with someone. You mentioned TV advertising. The bulk of that money is going over to TV. So, Lauren, who do you have with you tonight?
Keith, I'm here with Eric Deggans, the NPR television critic. We're going to talk about those ads. You really couldn't miss them this year. They were
Even
everywhere.
if you tried.
I know. Well, we're going to talk specific, but first, rate them for me. 1 being click, and 5 being you've convinced me.
Well, I'd say I'd agree with Dr. MacManus that the ads have gotten better towards the end of the campaign, but there was this static sort of attack and response that each campaign had that I think sort of numb people to the message. You know, this message that Chris is a flip-flopper, and this idea that Chris is Scott is an out-of-touch, wealthy person who doesn't know what the average person wants. These are things that were mentioned over and over and over again in these ads, and after a while, I think people grow numb to the message. They don't even really hear what you're saying. So I would give the average aggregate of ads sort of a 3.
A 3, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk some specifics. You mentioned sort of what I call sort of the Achilles heel that they both go after. Sure. For Rick Scott, that would be the business history. For a lot of people, this is something that was talked about in 2010 as well, but he won. It came back again in 2014. Have they done a better job of using that against him this time?
Well, and again, I think that's one of the problems, is that in the last election that Rick Scott was involved in, we heard a lot of these charges. So we're constantly hearing about the 75 times that he pled the fifth during a deposition. Now, this was in a case that wasn't connected to the fraud investigation that was involving the company that he once ran, Columbia HCA. So there's, you know, some details in the ad that are kind of obfuscated. And I think voters who are paying attention feel like they've heard this charge before, and they've decided whether or not they believe in it. So when you base so much of your strategy around pressing that point, people sort of feel like they've made their decision about how they feel about it. And I'm not sure how effective an ad like that is.
And, you know, there are some things that are sort of used by both campaigns, both the Crist campaign and the Scott campaign. The Rothstein ads, the Scott Rothstein ads are one of those, and his relationship or not with either one of them. Do people really even understand that?
Well, again, that's a questionable ad because one of the people that were featured in one of Scott's ads about Rothstein, it's unclear whether or not he even lost any money. He got a lot of his money back in a lawsuit. He made it seem as if Crist also swindled him. Crist, of course, is saying, I was duped by this guy like everybody else. So there's a lot of details in the ads that don't necessarily jibe with reality. And again, there's this sense that we hear the charge. This was something that was brought up in early ads. We're still seeing ads about this guy months later. And again, I feel like people have kind of decided how they feel about that issue.
And we've got to talk about quickly those flip-flop ads, because there have been two versions of those, and they seem pretty effective. A lot of research went into those.
Definitely. Well, you know, this idea that you could sort of show visually how Crist has been on one side of an issue and then how he's on another side of an issue, I think that's been very effective. And you know, these later ads that we've seen, you know, Crist has Bill Clinton speaking for him, but they found, you know, footage of him speaking on C-SPAN where he said that Bill Clinton should have resigned the presidency. And that's, again, a very effective ad, very visual. But it's coming so late in the game. There's been such this torrent of negativity that a lot of people, I think, have kind of shut down on these ads, and they're not even paying attention, even as some of the most effective ads start to air late in the game.
Interesting. Thanks so much for your perspective. The question is, will they work? I guess we'll find out tomorrow. Maybe, Keith.
Yeah, we will know eventually for sure. Hopefully tomorrow. Thank you, Lauren. And we'll be back with more right after this. And welcome back. I'm Keith Cate. You're watching a special one-hour edition of Your Vote Battleground Florida. We continue with our political analysts who have joined us on set. Dr. Susan MacManus, I want to talk to you a little bit about turnout because you think that it may not be so great after all.
I don't think it's going to be that great. Turnout in 2010 was 49%. And if around 25, 26% have already voted, I think you're going to be hard-pressed to see that kind of number tomorrow. Many people just wanted to vote early and got it over with, and I honestly think that all this negativity is going to make a lot of people stay home, and that we're going to have the third election in a row where we've had a drop in turnout.
So you think the people who voted early are the people who probably would have shown up on Election Day?
A large percentage of them, yes.
And early voting, again, we're talking about how many? 3 million?
We've had a little over 3 million, as a matter of fact, of the 11.9 million Florida voters have already cast ballots in this race. That's about 26%. Now, some folks are saying that this is unusually high. It's much higher than the early vote in 2010. Some folks are saying that forecasts an unusually high overall turnout after Election Day. Others are saying, as Susan just said, that it may not. It may be the same people who would have gone to the polls on Election Day. They're just getting it out of the way early.
But that leaves the candidates to decide where are those people that I can go strategically collect and take to the polls on Tuesday. Where are they going, Lauren?
Yeah, you know, and I've kind of kept an eye on where they have spent their time in general. And Rick Scott has spent a ton of time right here in Hillsborough County, in the Tampa Bay area, and Charlie Crist has spent a ton of time in South Florida because that is so important for him. So the question now is it going to pay off? And
as I recall, most of the money that's being spent on television advertising is being spent right here in the Tampa Bay market.
And this is the most divided market politically, and it's 1/4 of all the registered voters of the state. And after all, it's good politics to camp out in somebody else's backyard. So Scott spending time here when this is Crist's own territory is probably a good strategy.
Scott had 3 stops here in the Bay Area today.
All right, we're going to take a break, come back with some final thoughts right after this. Stay with us. All right, before we go, we have everyone back on set. I want to show you one more time this latest Quinnipiac University poll. It's the last one we're going to get before the election, and we have 42% of likely voters favoring Charlie Crist at this point, 41% for Governor Rick Scott, and Adrian Wiley, the Libertarian candidate, with 7% of the vote. I want to make sure that you keep it right here on News Channel 8 tomorrow night for our complete election returns after the polls close. We're going to have live instant updates on the numbers as they come in. as well as a special extended 1-hour edition of News Channel 8 at 11 o'clock. And don't forget, 8 is on your side tomorrow night with a full evening of election returns. I want to thank all of our guests for being here. Florida CFO, former CFO Alex Sink, thank you so much. USF political scientist Dr. Susan MacManus, William Marsh from the Tampa Tribune, Lauren Mayk, of course, from News Channel 8, and Will Weatherford, our Florida House Speaker. Thank you very much. Been interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess at this point, we just tell you folks to hope you get out and vote if you haven't done so already. 3 million of you have. That's terrific. And we'll see who ends up winning this race. Will it be Charlie Crist? Will it be Rick Scott? You guys can duke it out after the program. All right, we'll take a break here. We'll be back tonight at 11 o'clock. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Keith Cate. Good night.